Independent National Electoral Commission says it will be appealing the judgment of a federal high court mandating it to allow registered voters with temporary voters' cards to participate in the March 18th governorship and state assembly elections. According to Rotimi Oyekanmi, who is the chief press secretary to InEC chairman, the commission had been served a copy of the judgment and is already taking steps to launch an appeal against it. Justice Obiara Egwatu of the Federal High Court, sitting in Abuja, had on Thursday ruled in a case brought before him by two aggrieved registered voters, Kofoworola Olusegun and Wilson Allwell, and stated that there was no portion of the law, both the 1999 Constitution and the Electoral Act as amended, that states that it is only permanent voter cards that could be used, but that the law under Section 47 provided for only a voter's card. Arise analyst and head of mass communication at Bayes University, Abuja, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi joins us now to examine the logistical problems that might be thrown up by this implementation of the ruling, especially regarding the conduct of the governorship and state legislative polls. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for bringing me over.
Well, yes, it's always very interesting when we're having these discussions. This is another interesting situation here, about to throw a potential spanner into the works of InEC and the electoral process. Now, what could be the logistical implications of this? We do know that it's only two people who have come out to file this lawsuit, and it could potentially open the doors for this type of discussion of temporary voters' cards being used. So what could those logistical implications be, Dr. Abiodun?
Well, so many implications, very unfortunate, but of course it's legitimate for us to have this kind of judicial interventions. Individuals have rights in a system like this, and sometimes they also feel they want to explore all opportunities available to them, and the judiciary is one such avenue for them to explore. So we cannot condemn individuals and groups that feel aggrieved, but again, we have to put things within the bigger context of allowing the process, of the bigger picture of allowing a democratic process to flow, because if there are too many litigations, it might have a way on impeaching or delaying or frustrating the rightful course of the journey that we are embarking on, which is not necessarily a destination. Like this one specifically, of course, there are concerns with the fact that, InEC appealing it might again lead to another delay, another postponement in the governorship election, governorship and state houses of assembly election, which has already witnessed a week postponement. We just hope that the litigations, the back and forth in the judiciary would not lead to another postponement. And if we're having another postponement, then at what point will we say we're going to bring a closure to it? But this shouldn't distract us from actually looking at the substance of the case. The substance of the case is largely legitimate, because we're looking at people who have rightly registered to vote, and they are being told that they cannot vote just because they do not have an element, that indicates their ability to vote, which is the permanent voter's card. If you do not have a permanent voter's card, does that say that there are no other things, that can identify you as a bona fide voter? That's what I think the court, the judgment is actually pointing at. And what are these other things? The temporary voter's card should be able to identify you. Remember that with the case of national identification, identity card, quite a number of people, had problems having the permanent identity identity card. What worked for them was a temporary means of identification. So if it could work in that instance, then why can it not work in this instance? And of course, the technological process has also been savvy enough, to provide options and alternative in the case of one method not working. Like the BVAS itself, if your fingerprint cannot identify you, of course, there's facial capture, and if facial capture cannot identify you, of course, there is something else. I think there's a third thing as well. So these variations, these options are just a way to get around the process, and which is why we might be reasonable if we are questioning the veracity of making the route towards identification something that is rather monolithic, rather unilinear. There should be options, avenues, and that's what I think the judgment is pointing our attention to, which is why the litigants probably were not wrong in the first instance, but the overarching fear in the circumstances let people not take advantage of it and probably start going to court for frivolous reasons in a situation that might torpedo the democratic process, remembering how this didn't work in our favor, in the wake of the June 12th presidential elections, the infamous June 12th presidential election. Court processes, as we've been told, is an ideal process to resort to. It's part of the democratic process, but at the same time, it shouldn't ordinarily be abused, even though we respect the sanctity of that arm and we respect the ability to bring about peace in a situation where we have contending and disagreeing forces, as the case could be.
All right, Dr. Adeniyi, some would say that probably it's the InEC deciding to live in the Stone Ages and refusing to catch up with the times. Like you mentioned, a lot of people have questioned over the years, why is it that InEC must issue you a permanent voter's card before you can actually vote? That if that lacuna had not been created, we will not find ourselves where we are. And secondly, you also touched on it, but I want you to probably expatiate on it. What that becomes of the BVAS if the temporary voters card is allowed or grants you access to actually probably exercise your franchise? What that becomes of the BVAS and the data that are stored in the BVAS and all the complexity that comes with it?
Yes, Aaron, I think part of the problem we're also dealing with is one of trust. One of faithlessness largely in the system called Nigeria. You have different levels of faithlessness, different levels of mistrust or distrust, hovering around us, which is why sometimes when we have litigations like this, so many other motives are read into it rather than the ordinary, the primary motive that led to the litigation in the first instance. And of course, you also find agencies frittering, becoming anxious, because they do not know, they might know the beginning of the litigation, but they do not know where it will end because of the overarching, problem of, lack of trust. Otherwise, if we have faith in ourselves, we have faith in the system, we know that people will not be mischievous, people will not try to cheat, people will not try to circumvent process. It could just work in a way where you come, once you have registered, the system will still capture you, and of course, you'll be allowed to vote. But we know who we are, we know how things pan out, we know how we can be very mediocre in circumstances and how we actually want to circumvent processes and procedures. And that's why we actually conceived in the first instance of ramping up the mechanism for electing our leaders, by introducing technology, which is also compliant with modernity and with what is happening around the world, where technology has come to improve productivity and efficiency, limiting human contact with processes and enhancing, objectivity as the case could be. But of course, we also know that technology needs human being, to be properly activated, and they need some level of honesty, not to be abused, as the case could be, like we've sometimes suspected, in the election we just concluded. But having said all that, I think we probably don't have any other option other than to just see things through, because this judgment, if it holds, and I think if InEC does not succeed in appealing it, if it holds, might cause some other might have some other domino effect where we'll have some more litigants going to court, making one argument or the other, and sometimes if INEC might also want to implement the judgment, it might also create some kind of logistic and procedural problem for them. Again, considering the size of this country, the size of the population, and the passion and enthusiasm that the regular voter might want to display on election day, it might give them logistic problem, and the fact that their personnel, INEC personnel, are not all too perfect. Sometimes we see lethargy on their part, we see inefficiency on their part, and they might find it difficult making instantaneous judgment, where they have to decide in the case of voter A over voter B, voter C, or voter D, coming with different characterization. One having permanent voters card, the other one not having temporary voters card. Taking those instantaneous decisions at their levels might become a problem, and it might create further logistic problem in terms of delaying the time, that individual voter will take before the other one comes. And overall, it might affect the overall performance of the election itself. So these are all the issues we have to put into consideration. But the courts have come in, the judiciary has come in now. We do not have any option other than to follow it as it should be, because it's an important arm in the trinity, in the democracy that we are practicing.
Dr. Adeniyi, is this a crisis of discipline? Are we just not able to follow simple rules? And I ask that because, take for example, this when the national identity numbers were linked to cell phones, everyone had a certain amount of time to get their NINs linked up. If you didn't link it up, your number would be cut off. I don't know if there were too many individuals that took it to court saying, oh, you cut off my line, it's not fair, I didn't get my, all of this. INEC has given out these rules for voting for years. They gave a certain amount of time to get those PVCs. They talked about this Electoral Act. We've talked about progressing technologically, leaving things behind. They've spelled out the rules as to how to vote. Why would the courts even entertain such, in my own personal view, why would they entertain something that could potentially disrupt an entire system that relies so much on organization and protocol and red tape? It would throw everything up in the air. Because what now? What could happen if there is a big class action lawsuit and INEC actually doesn't win the appeal, and they don't vacate the order, and people are coming out with all sorts of shabbily made TVCs to come and vote, and then of course the votes all get tallied and some of them are thrown out, and then we have this same confusing situation again where nothing goes through, the courts are overburdened, we still don't know who was voted, and it seems like we can't even be disciplined as a nation to stick to our own rules. What is the problem? I know it's not your complete problem, but is it that we have an issue of discipline, especially in the courts?
Well, your question is actually a very complex one, but I dare say it's also very, very appropriate. It's one of attitude, it's one of that has to do with the crisis that we still have in as a nation that is still self-building. We're still constructing this nation, and the construction of a nation is not. It doesn't happen in the space. It doesn't happen in the sky. It's not something that is inanimate. It requires individuals. It requires citizens. And when the citizens are largely distrust, where they are likely disillusioned, what you see from them is a tepid, lackadaisical attitude, towards nation building, a problem of commitment, and of course that's reflected in the way they approach all situations. Only in very few cases will you see people who are actually genuinely patriotic, genuinely nationalistic, thinking about the whole, about sustenance, about how to get things correctly done, how to right wrongs, and how to bring about sustainability in due processes and due diligence. only in very few cases. And of course, at the level of leadership, we have also seen some of the people who you could say, are doing things rightly, are committed to leaving legacies and sustaining it. So I think it's a process, and of course, it's still a major character of a deficient nation that is still in quest, for growth and development. But do not forget, growth and development is not just at the level of infrastructure, not just at the level of utilities. It doesn't just stop at the level of having wonderful bridges, skyscrapers, aeroplanes, etc., etc. Attitude also matter in the construction of a nation, but our attitude is still problematic, and that's why we keep talking about reconfiguring our characters, our character, our identity, how we feel towards the Nigerian nation. All these things have a way of influencing the little bit that we do as citizens in the little corners that we find ourselves. How committed are you to the job that you are doing in your own little corner, realizing that the little bit that you do can rub off on the bigger picture, can rub off on the nation that you are serving. So if every individual is committed, you can, by the time the product of their commitment adds up, of course, it leads to a greater level of productivity on a bigger scale. But when you see individuals doing the opposite, not being committed, doing things mischievously, you've seen it also rubbing off negatively at the bigger picture. So that's the problem, really. But this is not to say that it's something that we cannot get around with. We do believe, the point has been made, that we can get around it with quality leadership that could come maybe deliberately or by happenstance. We just have to continue to wait and see, continue to try, and hopefully that it will come from either way, either deliberate or through happenstance. In the past, we have seen them emerging at the level of agencies, maybe by happenstance, people who have left legacies. But what we do need is to have it happening, deliberately or by happenstance at a more central space, such that that person can influence the generality of the populace and be galvanized rightly. So, to the specifics of your question, which I think I've touched on, individuals have that Aristotelian willpower to do what they want, but what will help them rather to do things correctly? What will help them is if they feel a higher sense of belonging in the nation that they inhabit, Nigeria, that is, and they think that they have an innate responsibility, to contribute, conscientiously to the evolution by doing the right thing. But do not forget what I said: doing the right thing does not necessarily fall from the sky. It comes from inspiration, and that inspiration will largely be provided by the right leader, that could come either deliberately or through happenstance. But again, that will come essentially through the instrumentality of the ballot. We have one supposedly now, and we just have to wait and see how things pan out.
All right, Dr. Adeniyi, my question is a sharp contrast from the question my colleague Howard just asked. Because looking at the figures now,
I don't mind that you're calling me. I don't mind that you're calling me doctor. It's fine. I was once a doctor, but more appropriately, if you call me a professor.
Okay, I'll retract that back, Professor Adeniyi. It actually has a good ring to it, I must say. Okay, Prof, I would like to hear from you. A sharp contrast from what Howard just asked. Because looking at the figures right now, they say InEC released the figures that 93.4 million registered voters, but 87.2 million PVCs collected. When you put that together, when you collect the numbers together, the differentials are well over 6 million. And we've heard time and time again about just the recent one here in Lagos State, whereby they said that the army found quite a lot of PVCs in the bush. Some will call it political chicanery. Some will call it probably deception. Some will call it contrivance to disenfranchise people. We've seen this thing play out time and time again. Well over 6 million people disenfranchised. We've seen videos circulated online, or we've seen people complain that their PVCs were nowhere to be found. And it is almost a travesty if you deny Nigerians their basic civic duty to go out there and vote for their leader. So probably this particular judgment has been long coming, because since 1999, we've seen one too many people disenfranchised, no thanks to probably INEC dropping the ball or someone conniving with certain people within INEC to probably disenfranchise Nigerians from exercising their civic duty?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello?
I can hear you, Professor Adeniyi.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Very important point. You know, I think it could be one of many things, really. A question of voter apathy is a global one. It comes up now and again, and of course, nation states have been very concerned about getting people integrated, increasingly involved in the electionary process, and that's why in some places you even find out that voting is compulsory, like in Australia, for instance. But in some other, many other countries, it's largely a civic responsibility, and civic responsibility, I beg your pardon, goes a little more than just being voluntary. You are likely compelled, even though there are no sanctions, and of course, there have also been arguments that if you refuse to vote, it's another form of decision making, it's another point of way of voting, which means that whatever those who vote say, you have to comply. I mean, you have to go with it, or rather simply making a statement by refusing to come out to exercise your franchise, But the onus is always on the authority to make all the conditions right for individuals to vote, But in our own case, it's often be unfortunate. Like you quoted some figures very correctly, 87 million registrants, quite all right, but how many people who actually came out, collected PVC in the first instance, compared with the number of people that eventually voted? It has to be it's a conversation that I think we continue. But it also has a lot to do with INEC. INEC at the level of sensitization, at the level of voter education, and I'm aware they have a vibrant, robust department in charge of that. Maybe we'll say that a lot more will have to be done on their part to sensitize the populace on the need for them to continue to perform their civic responsibility. But not just INEC this time. What about the political parties? Because they are also important stakeholders in this matrix. Sometimes when they come up with a huge number of people who are supposedly members of their own party, but at the end of the day, maybe a quarter of these people will turn out to vote. Why do we have this contradiction? And what about the civil society? Yes, you can say they are doing their job, they are doing their best because they don't enjoy official funding, as the case could be. And of course, the media, both that comprise of both public and private sector, they are doing their bit in terms of sensitization as well. But what I'm concerned about is public education. Some level of awareness creation, much more higher level of promotion that we presently have, so that people would not just see voting as an ordinary exercise, but something that has to do with their psychology, with boosting their self-esteem, getting them involved in the art of government and governance, because that's the only time they have the power to determine, who rules them for another 4 years, as the case could be. So it's a sacred responsibility placed on the individual, but largely, if they are not told so, if they are not made to realize this, they simply take it for granted. And that's why you see in some instances, they are ready to sell it, to mortgage it, for handouts, And of course, it's we are largely ignoble, that we have said several times, and something that isn't really good for the soul of our democracy. But in the case that you have cited, what do we do in the circumstance? We just keep trying and hope that all agencies in the multi-stakeholder affair that we call the electionary process, we up the ante, they'll be up and about, we'll raise the stakes in ensuring that we have a higher level of efficiency and productivity.
Right. Well, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, thank you always for joining us on the show this afternoon.